Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This episode is brought to you by Peacock. The new Peacock original documentary, Matthew Perry, A Hollywood Tragedy, dives deep into the beloved actor's rise to fame and his tragic death. 5 people, including Perry's personal assistant, 2 medical doctors, and an alleged Hollywood drug dealer known as the Ketamine Queen, were charged with conspiracy to illegally provide Perry with the ketamine. Explore the details of the case in this heartbreaking special, streaming now only on Peacock.
Welcome back to Generals and Napoleon. We have back on the line, once again, the greatest, most brilliant guest of all time on any podcast anywhere. Marcus Cribb, how are you, sir?
I can't live up to that, but I'm very good. Thank you so much for the kind recording. We've just been having a chat and a nice catch-up, and it's great to be back because life's been busy. So thank you so much for bearing with me and having me back on one of my favorite podcasts of all time.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah, Marcus is jack of all trades, basically. He's been on other podcasts in the Napoleonic world. He's also a battlefield tour guide. So if you ever want to tour, say, the battlefields in Portugal or Spain or Waterloo, you could do a lot worse than Marcus. I'll just say that.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. You could do worse. Yeah.
You literally could do worse. Yeah, Marcus is fabulous to have on. You can find him on Twitter, Blue Sky, anywhere, Facebook, social media. Really good posts if you want to follow Marcus. And he is a member of the NRWGC, so you can check him out there as well.
Still harking on about the charity, back as a trustee on that. Like I say, always happy to talk to people on social media. Just ignore me on Instagram because it's just photos of my dog. Like, my dog in Scotland. The rest of it is history. But yeah,
his dog and history. That's right. Well, we're not talking about the dog tale. Who is the gentleman in question for today's podcast?
We're going to be talking about who you probably all know as Uxbridge, but he's Henry Paget, the Marquis of Anglesey, but he's known as Uxbridge at Waterloo, which we get to quite a little bit later into our story, but very famous for that. But because of British aristocracy and rules, his name changes quite a few times over his life.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. Marcus is going to tell us why his name changes and why we have name changes in British aristocracy. But just reading up on this gentleman, and similar to Admiral Nelson or Marshal Murat's exploits, this guy's life sounds like a dime store novel, almost too incredible or too outlandish to be real. What is your thumbnail sketch of Paget/Uxbridge?
So yeah, he's out there. He's handsome Henry, the ladies. He's a bit of a bounder, as they would have said in the time. He's good looking. He spends most of his time as a cavalry officer. He's dashing about. He's having his way with other people's wives, and he's actually quite good in the saddle. Euphemism not fully avoided on purpose. So he's out there as a really interesting character. And as often the case, we don't really need to fictionalize some of these characters because these people led really interesting lives.
Yeah, he did. And we're going to kind of dive into both his personal and professional life. So let's kind of start early. Let's discuss his early life. He was born as Henry Bailey Paget, the eldest son of the family, in May 1768. So he's 1 year older than Wellington and Napoleon. Where was he born and what was his upbringing like?
So he is from aristocracy. He's from roughly what we call Anglo-Irish stock, a bit similar to Wellington and lots of his family. So this is aristocracy from England that have gone over to Ireland, usually like very late medieval era, to settle and have come back down. His family are very well-to-do on both sides. There's aristocracy and church in there, obviously very powerful forces, especially in Ireland. So he goes from being Bailey to Bailey Paget and then later Paget, largely because of grandparents and great-grandparents on his mother's side. And they drop the Bailey side and actually adopt the maternal surname of Paget, which largely due to one of his ancestors who was a brigadier general. So that changes that's his first kind of name change. So he goes from Bailey to Bailey Paget, and then later on they drop it and have it as Paget. That's mostly under his father. That's not completely unusual. We see Wellington, who's born Wesley. His brother makes it Wellesley. So it happens a fair bit, and there's lots of cases out there that takes place because of marriage or inheritance. So this is kind of one of these things. They give nods to their parents. So it's not as unusual as it sounds, but he has quite a good upbringing. He goes to one of the elite schools, Westminster School in London, which is an ancient school and very well run even today, and goes to Oxford University. So he's well educated.
Yeah, indeed. And as you say, Westminster, Oxford, well-educated chap. How does he get involved in the military?
Yeah, so he has a brief stint, as many do, as pretty rotten borough MPs, where they kind of basically are buying their votes in. There's no direct evidence of that, but I wouldn't be surprised because he's being elected to places with no opposition. And then he purchases into the military, which was very common at the time. For summary, this was the main British system. Soldiers would work their way up, start off as private and be promoted. Officers weren't, up into the rank of, including the rank of lieutenant colonel. They had to buy their way. Few exceptions, very often sometimes it being sold at half price and things like that. There was a logic to that. The idea being is that you are dedicated into the system so much that you want to protect it. So you are kind of fighting for the state and almost your investment. You can sell your commission, sometimes at a profit at certain times. And that also meant that because of this, it can be pretty underhand. So his father, for example, raised a regiment of militia and becomes lieutenant colonel straight away. He buys his way in, and over the course of basically a year, goes from being a second lieutenant up to lieutenant colonel. He plays the system. There's ways that you can do this with basically like booking agents in London normally, and you bypass the expected waiting time of 2 years and you go very quickly through. Basically, you're buying other people's seats as such. So that's how he gets very quickly. He doesn't have much intention of spending time, traipsing around in the mud.
Yeah, and it's interesting. It's different from how the Royal Navy, where you actually have to work your way up the officer ranks. So the army, you can just kind of buy, like, all right, I want to start it as a major, and if I have enough money, I can get there.
Yeah, and the system officially means that you can't, but everyone knows that you could. Ironically, Wellington kind of has a bit of a rant about the system, but Wellington does it too. So there are ways and means. Wellington is definitely a hypocrite, but there are ways and means of doing this. Like you say, the Navy, you can kind of get your way. You can buy a good midshipman way, so you can kind of put people onto ships the way you want. But it stops at lieutenant because you've got to take an exam.
Right.
You can be an acting lieutenant for so long. We see it famously in Master and Commander of people being acting lieutenants or really old midshipmen. But to be a substantial lieutenant, you have to take an exam, and that is professional. That doesn't exist for the army outside of the engineers and the artillery, who kind of have to go to school because of the maths and the science involved. So the cavalry and the infantry, which includes the guards and the horse guards, they buy their way in, and they've got different values. There was a book, you'd open it up like a shopping catalogue, and you could choose where to go. The guards and the horse guards cost more money because they're more fashionable. They've got better uniforms. You're more likely to be stationed in London. You're stationed in London in a nice uniform, you're more likely to turn the eye of your desired sex. The ladies love you, basically, is what I'm trying to say. And it looks good. So it was about style, it was about fashion. Think Pride and Prejudice. People walk in their uniforms and they fluster that fan. And Henry Uxbridge is handsome.
Yeah. If you're just a Joe Schmo and you have no money and you have no mathematical skill, you're pretty much headed to the infantry, right? Because you can't afford a horse in your fancy uniform, so you can't be in the cavalry. And you can't do a high-level math, so you can't be in the artillery, so it's the infantry or maybe a seaman, I would imagine.
And that's the case. I mean, you still need a fair bit of money, though, to go into the infantry. These are basically loss-making roles. So your salary will cover a lot, but it won't cover basically your wine bill, is what it comes down to. because once you're in. So it is an investment to be in and to be dining. And so you don't just have the wine bill. You've got people like Henry Uxbridge will be going hunting. So you're going to be paying for the upkeep of your horses, your hounds, all of that kind of stuff. You're going to be throwing parties. So therefore there's more wine and bills. You're going to be replacing your uniform regularly. And that's usually silver and gold braid on the uniform made of real metals. So that's why we see so many sons of the aristocracy going into the profession.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Paget, our hero, really sees his first action in the 1799 Battle of Castricum, where he is commanding a cavalry brigade in the loss against the French. Do we know what happens here? I guess he performs well, even though it's a loss.
Yeah, he forms well. This is one of the kind of the Duke of York's Lowlands campaign. So this is it's a couple of allies, but it's basically the British and the Russians fighting in Holland, what's modern day Holland anyway, against a joint Dutch and French force. And this is kind of one of the ones of the Grand Old Duke of York. He had 10,000 men. So Duke of York, which is the king's younger brother, is going around and getting a bit lost. So the main battle is he's just kind of commanding one of the brigades. So he's not one of the senior commanders. He's a senior officer, if the distinction makes sense. And yeah, it's a loss, but the campaign is being fought quite badly. This is before the British cavalry reforms come in, and it's during this campaign that a very interesting chap called Le Marchand, ironically British, because he's got a French name because he's from the Channel Islands. This is one of the campaigns that he spots the British cavalry. I think the quote is that they were trying to chop at the enemy like woodsmen's axes, and they were spotted mostly chopping their own horses' ears off. So this is where Le Marchand then comes in and does the sword drill and redevelops the swords and things like this. So the cavalry at the time, very stylish, but not the most effective.
Okay. Yeah, we'll come back to that. So by 1802, Paget is made a major general in the British Army, and his professional life is going pretty well at this point.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't been in the army that long. I think it's 1795 he buys his way up and through. And by the end of 1795, he's lieutenant colonel. By this point, he's a brigade commander and a major general. So he's skipped the first stage, which is really important, very quickly. But after this, it's on either merit or kind of patronage. So he's doing well on both. He spends his time buying ranks in with the infantry, but after that, he's commanding cavalry regiments. And so you typically say that he is a cavalryman, and that's where he now he commands a regiment and then commands a brigade. And he seems to actually be good at that. We have some fantastic actions to talk about, but that seems to be his skill set.
Yeah, and we'll get to his exploits here in just a bit, because he does quite well against the French cavalry, who are supposed to be the best in Europe. However, I guess now is as good a time to discuss his scandalous personal life, and I'm going to have Marcus try and walk us through this tangled web, because it involves a lot of people, and we're going to try and explain it as easily as possible. It must be awkward, though, for Paget and his future commander, the Duke of Wellington.
Short answer, yes. Long answer, yes. So he seems to be having quite a happy marriage. He's married to Lady Caroline Villiers, another very prominent family, the Villiers family. They related to the Duke of Buckingham family of
lots of kids,
Musketeer fame. So lots of kids, 8 children.
8 kids.
I think 6 sons, 8 children, and they seem to be doing quite well until he gets his head turned. And so they've got these children. Lots of them go on and become their own military careers. But then he begins an affair with the Duke of Wellington's sister-in-law, Charlotte Wellesley.
This is the Duke of Wellington's brother's wife.
Correct.
Yep. Okay.
She's the wife of Henry Wellesley. So they meet in London, and then they resume their affair when he comes back from the Peninsular War, which we haven't got to yet. That's why it's even confusing me. So they meet, they start an affair, and then he comes back from the Peninsular War, and they carry on the affair. So this is in the interlude where Wellesley's gone out there, hasn't actually fought with Paget, and then he was recalled due to the treaties, and then he carries on commanding the cavalry, which we're going to come on to in 1 second. And he then comes back, continues the affair. It leads to the breakup of Henry Wellesley's marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's some quite scandalous propaganda going around. And there's some pretty nasty stuff they're saying about him, because affairs were fairly common at this time. But for the woman to actually run away with the chap, this is the era of official mistresses at court. The king's got official mistresses, basically.
Yeah, Nelson had affairs, and
hugely. Wellington was having them left, right, and centre, but the difference is they then keep their wife. So to lose your wife is seen as quite scandalous. This is hugely double standards. This is really like bad things to be judging people for. But they seem to be judging Henry Wellesley much worse than Paget.
And we're saying it's scandalous for our time. It was scandalous for their time.
It did create a scandal. It's in national press. I think cartoons. I think people are calling him a cuckold. And then they elope together, which means that Wellington, who becomes Wellington at this time, refuses Paget to go back out to the Peninsular War.
Mm-hmm.
So it does affect that relationship, because if somebody runs away with your brother's wife, you're going to take your brother's side in this. I think kind of rightly.
Right. And then that person is now in your office, which is basically the commander's tent. It would be awkwardness.
Yeah, it's hugely awkwardness. And just quickly, his first wife, Caroline, she ends up falling in love with another duke, a Duke of Argyll, a Scottish Duke, Campbell, and actually pursues the divorce. And so there ends up being a divorce, and she remarries quite quickly too. So let's say they married wrong the first time round. Is it Spike Milligan or somebody who said, you should always marry your second wife first? Let's maybe put a positive spin on this. But it is a scandal. Mostly because, divorce is not easy. The church has still got a lot of power. You need to get a private member's bill from Parliament to be able to get an aristocracy kind of divorce at the time. So it's being debated in one of the chambers of Parliament.
I was reading up on that. If you're a female at the time, unless your life was imminently in danger, you couldn't get one on your own volition. You had to get your husband's permission to get one.
Correct. And that's because it's going to Parliament. And women don't have any form of suffrage. They're still property, basically, at this time. So completely different world. So they couldn't pursue it themselves unless they could basically force crime against their husband to prove that he had criminal activities. So, and I don't mean gambling and embezzling, because that's going on. So the adulterous side is kind of wrapped up in other areas here. But they did get the divorce through and remarried. And they had a lot of children.
And they stayed together for quite a while. It wasn't like a one-off with his mistress for a year. The second marriage, as you said, was his long-term marriage. So it worked out well for him in the end, but it was just scandalous at the time.
Yeah.
Okay. Getting back to his military career. In 1808, Paget is part of Sir John Moore's army in Spain, and he's commanding the cavalry and shockingly defeats the French cavalry at the Battle of, is that Sahugun?
Sahugun, yeah.
Yep. And then again crushes them at the Battle of Benevente. This time the Imperial Guard French cavalry under Napoleon's eye.
Yeah.
I thought the French cavalry were superior to the British cavalry at this time during the Napoleonic Wars. So what happened here?
So two kind of things have happened. One, the cavalry have been reformed. So they go from these kind of wild, charging, slashing cavalry to being reformed. They actually have sword drills. These are written down cuts, the 6 cuts and the 2 guards. But they have special drills. They have effectively, they can do it on a post, or they can do it drawn on a wall. It's a circle, which I love the fact that they basically draw a mustachioed face inside. Let's not beat around the bush. This is a Frenchman's face they're drawing on a wall, and they practice slashing at that. And they get really good at it. They also, behind the scenes, Le Marchand invents 2 new swords, the 1796 pattern, heavy cavalry sword and light cavalry saber. And the light cavalry saber is good. slightly weighted at one end, and it's a slashing machine. It will go through the flesh, through the muscle, and break the bone into the bone, whereas because it's a saber. Whereas the heavy cavalry sword is kind of long and points and goes into people. For reference, the heavy cavalry sword is what Richard Sharp uses in both the films and the novels. For those of Sharp fame, but if you really had a choice and you were on a horse, you'd want the light cavalry saber. This is what the light dragoons and the hussars are using, and that's Paget's section. You got the heavy cavalry and the light cavalry, and the heavy cavalry tend to have breastplates and helmets depending on their branch. The breastplates kind of come in later, the cuirass, but they have the helmets. They tend to have slightly bigger horses, and they have this straight sword. The light cavalry, which are meant to be used for reconnaissance and then riding down French infantry, actually get used quite interchangeably. And what happens here, the other section is they've gone through the reform, is they get used really well, and they get used really well by Paget. So at Sahagun, they're on the retreat, they're kind of doing screening, so that's where you're going out and protecting your own forces. And they end up basically in the same village as the French. So it's potentially actually going to go badly for them. There is 2 regiments of French, one of whom was written that they destroy the French cuirassiers. Yes and no. They're provincial French cuirassiers, which means they're actually recruited from the Spanish. But, sounds good.
Yeah, victory is a victory. We'll take it.
Victory. And they get caught basically stationary, riding really slowly. They stop to kind of unsling their carbines, and the British cavalry come out the side, and metal meets flesh. They smash into them and take them out. The first provisional cuirassiers, which is in the French army but Spanish, they're disbanded after the battle. They are beyond decimated. They are taken out of this action. Right. That's good going. So to be able to say that there's no one really left that can go back and start retraining, so you don't have substantial numbers, that's out.
Yeah, I remember Marshal Augereau's corps, after they got destroyed at Eylau, there was barely anything left because they were torn up by cannonballs, and they just redistributed that corps to the remaining corps because there was nothing left.
Yeah, and that does something. If you in a unit, in a regiment, you carry on honours, history, and tradition of that unit, good or bad. If you've got nothing left to carry on and you're starting in from scratch, that's a real mark. Most militaries like to carry on the traditions of a previous one rather than start up a new one. So that's something. And at Benevente, quite similar, but there's some horse artillery get involved. And they do. There are members of the Imperial Guard Cavalry, French Imperial Guard Cavalry there, and they're defeated by these regular British cavalry. And so, statistically, stereotypically, whatever you want to say, you think of Imperial Guard being the elite, the best of the best. They're veterans. They've got the eye of the emperor. But these normal farmer sons with a saber who've done a lot of right arm practice swinging of their sword get in amongst them, grit their teeth. And this is in the snow. They talk about fingers being so numb that they can barely hold their sabers. They've got probably a leather glove on, and they're ringing sword against sword. The vibrations of that's going through numb fingers. They have a strap that goes around their wrist. You can imagine how many of them are going to be dropping their sword, gritting their teeth, pushing each other into the saddle. And the British cavalry come out on top against these elite troops. So hand it to Paget's timing as well as the soldiers who have to go through the fighting and the action. But Paget's right there directing this action in amongst it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one of the... Do they capture General Lefebvre Dessunet? I think they do. I think that's the Benevente one.
He's captured. He goes back to Britain. An officer at the time has to offer their word that they won't escape, and they're basically given parole. So they're given a house in town. So they get nicer... They don't have to go into a prisoner of war camp, is what I'm trying to say, which are all over Britain at the time. And some of the soldiers, and I'm not going to beat around the bush, some of the French soldiers were treated appallingly badly. There's a reason that Portsmouth Harbour is so wide. I used to live in Portsmouth. It used to be a wide river. Now it's a harbour, because they used to give the French a shovel and say dig. And if they died, they would get chucked onto a place called Rat Island. And the bodies were just there. So the officers got this extra bit. He broke his word and escaped back to France. he ends up leading, I think it's a division of cavalry. He ends up leading more troops at Waterloo. He's captured at Waterloo, tries to escape again at Waterloo, having given his word there, but is recaptured on the battlefield, and ends up escaping again, going off to America as part of the Vine and Olive community, which was ex-French generals in America. And he decides that his time has had enough and he's going to come back to France, and is sadly shipwrecked just off Cork in Ireland, where he's buried. So, he has quite a... I do believe that I need to double check my thing, but I do believe that the soldier who captured him is given a sum of money and sets up a pub because he's given an award for capturing a general of the Imperial Guard. So, old soldier's dream of setting up a pub with some prize money. Just as little as
And what a great story to tell all your friends how you got the prize money. I captured a general of the Imperial Guard.
I captured a general of the Imperial Guard and I bought a pub.
Yeah, that's something very British right there.
Yeah, it's pretty stereotypically British, actually, to go away from Uxbridge for a minute. Is soldiers buying pubs. Love it.
Anyways, back to Paget.
The important bit is he does all this. The army goes back to Corunna, ends up on the south coast of England, looking like beggars, as one of the famous quotes is. It's under Rowland Hill. They kind of try to reform. Some are sent back out there, and this is when we get the Oporto campaign, but not him. So this is when he then runs off and has his affair. Just quickly, as we're talking about Paget, if I may, his brother goes back out there. His younger brother, Edward, and he's one of the generals who leads the troops over the Douro in the Battle of Porto. You thought I couldn't squeeze the Battle of Porto into this one, but I have. He goes over and actually he loses an arm at the Battle of Porto, shot off by a stray musket ball. So there's a reason.
We'll come back to that. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. Hold that thought, because I didn't know that. That's interesting. Okay, so Paget, in the meantime, he's somewhat on the sidelines, but he does get involved in the disastrous Walcheren expedition where, again, they're in the Low Countries or thereabouts, and basically all they do is set up camp. Bernadotte puts a ring around them of French troops, and they all get basically malaria from the mosquitoes, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bit of fighting, not to take it too much away from them, but they basically all get sick of malaria. And the soldiers who come back are all in their beds sweating and dying, and it's really bad for the British. It's badly thought of. You don't want to set a camp in the middle of a malaria-infested swamp, and that's what they do. There are some actions, but it's quite stalemate compared to, let's say, the Peninsular War. And the reason he's out there in the Low Countries is because Wellington says, "I don't want you back. You've run off with my sister-in-law." So that's why he's in what's a pretty disastrous campaign for the British.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because his name is somewhat checkered by his personal decisions.
Yeah, and that's it. So this is a bad military career stage and a bad personal life stage. This is going to be rough. Benevente and Sahagun are small actions, but they become quite famous. You know, like you're saying. Yeah. Beating French cavalry. French cavalry are pretty famous for being good. Sahagun becomes a famous pub drinking song, not to be stereotypically British and talk about pubs again, but it does become a pub drinking song, and there's a few renditions out there on good old YouTube. So yeah, I mean, it's known. You know, we like a victory, whether that's small. Especially, you think Corunna's a defeat basically because we're walking away and then we turn around and beat the French at the last minute. So we're trying to pull those little victories out, a bit like Dunkirk. Sahagun, Benevente, they could have made his name a bit as just being like kind of almost pure cavalry actions. But he's left in stalemate in a malaria-infested camp. Yeah,
well, we mentioned, he gets back to England. And in 1810, he marries Lady Charlotte, his mistress, the sister-in-law of the Duke of Wellington. And he inherits the title Earl of Uxbridge in 1812. So again, can you help us non-British folk describe how your name goes from Paget to Uxbridge?
So he's going to still have the same surname of Paget, but he's now got the title Uxbridge, which means that he's going to be known as Uxbridge. And you would no longer call him Mr. Paget. I think he would have been the Honourable anyway, as being a son of a lord. You use your aristocracy title becomes prevalent, and your family name really is for private matters. So all of his papers and everything would now be Uxbridge. Uxbridge, for the record, is a small town to the west of London. Now it's part of West London, and there's a big university and a few museums. But it's part of West London. At the time, it's a town just outside of London.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me now because I remember like when Napoleon's marshals were just marshals, he'd be like, "Oh, well, Marshal Soult," he'd address him like that in official letterhead. But when he was Duke of Dalmatia, from that moment forward, he would just address him Duke of Dalmatia after that. Yeah,
correct. And there's a whole hierarchy from Royal Duke all the way down to Baronet within this. And you can go up that ladder basically. And at the top, people are very well thought of. Often the title does come with land, and so therefore with lands comes rent and money.
Yeah, indeed.
And more uniforms and more medals and all those good things that we like.
Yeah, well, our friend Uxbridge finally gets called up from the bench of reserves for the Waterloo campaign against Napoleon in 1815. He fights at Quatre Bras and Waterloo. He commands 13,000 Allied cavalry and 44 guns of horse artillery under the resentful eye of the Duke of Wellington. How does he perform in these two battles?
He does quite well. Wellington's pretty resentful. Uxbridge, in the meantime, has made some patronage with the Prince Regent, who becomes George IV. And so therefore, Wellington doesn't have much choice. And this is all part of the thing of the Waterloo campaign. They're trying to, on one hand, say that they don't want the Prince of Orange, who's only ever really been one of Wellington's staff officers, to command the whole army. So because of how many troops the Dutch are going over, and he's royal. So he wins that battle, and he can't really get rid of Uxbridge. So he makes him second in command. Now, Wellington has a few second in commands. I believe his brother is very briefly. But he doesn't really use a second in command in the same way you would today, who you give all your plans to. He deputizes for you in case of illness or death. It's more honorific, and he holds him at arm's length. But he is commander of the cavalry, and he has a cavalry background. We've seen that he's had some success with the cavalry, and he does quite well. His peak, I would say, is the unknown day, which is the 17th of June. So we have Quatre Bras and Ligny being fought on the 16th of June. On the evening of the 16th and the beginning of the 17th, Wellington's Anglo-Allied forces decide to move back to Mont Saint-Jean, aka Waterloo. And this is a point that Wellington's had in his mind. So he goes back with lots of the infantry very early in the day and leaves Uxbridge to command the rear guard. Bit of a rough detail. Rear guards, by nature, you kind of lose it. But it's about time delay. And Uxbridge does really well here. I see him described as ballet de guerre, so it's the dance. And he commands cavalry and horse artillery. But he does something really unusual for a senior general at this point. He kind of acts as a junior officer, and he individually rides to squadron. So that is the equivalent to like company level for the infantry. Squadrons and commands where they're going to go. Right. A couple of points, at least twice, he's almost captured. He's basically riding between villages with, let's say, 60 to 80 men. And then turns around the corner and there's a regiment of French cavalry. And he's spotted going, oh, made a mistake. Everyone over here. And like hops over hedges, leading them galloping. So he's really in amongst it. So that's a positive and a negative. The men are probably going to respond quite well to that. Is he a little bit too close to the situation? Well, let's face it, at this point, Wellington's a micromanager himself, so his new boss gets amongst the situation. So maybe he's learning from that as well. But also, it's a very different campaign to some of the ones he's been of in the past. This is really large scale. So maybe it's that kind of familiarity of going back to being a more junior role. But it also inspires them. And the rear guard is really important when you put into my mind the 18th of June. One of the main reasons that the French don't open fire in the morning is the French army is still marching down the road. They're delayed. And that kind of caterpillar effect, if the front is delayed, the rear is going to be really snared up. Think of a traffic jam at rush hour. One car brakes too hard if you're in LA city centre and there's gridlock. We've all seen how the films start. And that's basically what's happens. So he actually acts very well on the 17th of June. Which brings us to the big affair, the 18th of June.
Yeah, and here I know the British cavalry divisions decimate D'Erlon's first corps on that main attack.
Yeah,
But then Uxbridge's troops, I think it's a Union brigade, they get counterattacked by the French cavalry. So it's kind of like, they're doing well for a minute and then they lose. It was like a mixed bag, I guess.
it is. And this is pretty much the majority of the British cavalry, which at this point is the heavy cavalry. So you've got the two main brigades, the British Heavy Cavalry, which is the Union Brigade, and the Household Brigade. The Household Brigade being like the Household Cavalry and the Royals, and then the Union Brigade, which are made up of the Irish Horse and the Second Royal North British Dragoons, more popularly later known as the Scots Greys. Everyone cheers Scotland forever. In famous paintings right here. I have them in my living room.
I heard the bagpipes. Yeah.
Absolutely. This is what when I say the Scots Greys, the Second Royal North British Dragoon, you should hear the bagpipes. You should hear Highland Laddie, and we're going to get really excited. What happens is D'Erlon's corps come on in the same old style, rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat. They march up just the eastern side to Wellington's left of the crossroads, and D'Erlon's corps come up just on the eastern side near La Haye-Saunce in those fields, just slightly undulating. What we don't have today is actually there was a hedgerow at the top of that. And it was as they were reaching the top of that hedgerow, British infantry ready to basically fall back, is Uxbridge gives the order for the heavy cavalry to go in. As the hedgerow snares them up, and we think that it was then the columns, the French densely packed columns, moving into line. So this kind of old thing about the French attacking in column, they did because it's mass bodies, but then they go out, and they were going to go into 3 or 4 ranks deep so that they could fire their muskets. They weren't stupid.
Right.
The columns work to force their way through the infantry, but if the infantry aren't going to be forced away, they need to deploy into line to shoot. But that means that people are moving. When they're moving, they can't shoot. Right. And it's as that combination, as they're moving out into line and they're trying to force their way through a hedgerow, which go out now, force your way through a hedgerow, you turn sideways, it's difficult, you're wearing a backpack, and everyone's fighting with a knapsack on, it gets in the way, it gets caught. That's when the heavy cavalry, the Union, the Household Brigades hit them. That's when, they are meant to be chargers of Scotland forever.
Sure.
The Second Royal North British Dragoons, Scots Greys. They're in there with those straight heavy cavalry swords. They get in amongst D'Erlon's corps. They capture possibly 3, definitely 2, because one's might be recaptured, but definitely 2 Eagles of the 105th and the 45th EAM regiments de ligne, and they get in there and they cause mayhem to D'Erlon's corps.
Right.
But as you say, there's a phrase here, there's a book, galloping at everything.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
This episode is brought to you by Coffee Mate. After watching this season of the HBO's original series, The White Lotus, this is the tropical getaway I needed. One more pina colada, please.
Hey, you're not on mute.
Oh, I thought I was in paradise. Turns out it was my Coffee Mate. Coffee Mate pina colada and Thai-iced coffee-flavored creamers. Inspired by the newest season of HBO's original series, The White Lotus. For the love of coffee. Try now.
Right. They get overly excited, and is it Ponsonby, I think, gets killed, one of the other generals, British generals, because they get countercharged by the French cavalry.
Yeah, they keep going. Waterloo is not a flat battlefield. It doesn't have just one hill, as we have on so many maps and wargaming. I love wargaming, but people always have Waterloo as like one little hill. There's actually kind of 3. There's a little ridge in the middle at the bottom of the valley, and there's a bigger ridge, which the French are. The French are on a ridge. It makes sense. It's not a bad tactic to be on the reverse of the slope. And the French are there, and they've got their guns. The grand battery thing's debated, but it's likely to be lots of batteries that are very close together rather than one big battery. Right, that's much easier then. people debate this for chapters. But there's like 60 to 90 guns there, and they're right at them. They can't really fire that much because otherwise they'll kill their own troops. And so the British cavalry head up towards those guns. They can't do a lot. They're now milling around that out formation, and the French cavalry come in. Famously, they're lancers. And lancers against cavalry, especially who are disorganised at this point, do huge damage. And it kind of takes the British heavy cavalry out of the rest of Waterloo. Arguably, Uxbridge has released his hounds at this point, and he's no longer in control of the situation. You can't recall a hound that's got a rabbit in its sight, and that's what basically happens. He's probably going to be stood there, eyes wide, well, riding, he's in the saddle, wanting to recall. Famously, in the brilliant 1970 film, they play recall on the bugle, and nothing happens. So, yeah, that's the situation that we find ourselves, and the British heavy cavalry taking out the action. That doesn't mean that there aren't Dutch cavalry out there, and also British light cavalry, who aren't very much as well talked about. They get involved in the counter-charging to Ney's cavalry attack. So there are still British cavalry in the action.
But it's almost to me like, Durlan was going to be the main sledgehammer. So it's almost like you used your bishop to get the other guy's queen. Like you knocked out the main part. Yeah, you lost your bishop because the cavalry overcharged and got killed. But they did their job. And Paget or Uxbridge was probably overall happy that they caused that kind of damage to the French.
Yeah, Durlan's corps don't manage to reorganise until late into the afternoon. To take a corps out with 2 brigades of cavalry with a bit of support, that's rock, paper, scissors. That's small against big. And they do really well. So from that point of view, they've done their job in many ways. They, to be defensive of them, they weren't ever going to be able to hold up to the French cavalry in numbers. So when we have like Ney's famous cavalry charge, the British cavalry didn't go in, and the Dutch. They don't go in majorly. They kind of counter-charge behind the Allied lines. Having these extra 2 brigades of cavalry wouldn't have made that much difference. They would never have had the numbers. I mean, credit to the French army. They've managed to rebuild these numbers of horses from the retreat in 1812, 1813 in 2 years. But they've got the numbers on their side in Waterloo. So Uxbridge has one big kind of throw of the dice. He kind of rolls a double 6. He does really well. And then it's kind of flipped to, it's not quite a double 1. It's not quite snake eyes, but it's low score. But he's still got a little bit in his back pocket that he can play with. So that's his main role in the main fighting of the day at Waterloo.
Right. Well, it turns snake eyes for him personally here. As we all know, Napoleon loses Waterloo. The Imperial Guard charge. They retreat, and the French army is set running. But one of the last cannon shots fired at Waterloo hits Paget in the right leg, requiring it to be amputated. Could you walk us through the famous anecdote of Wellington and Paget or Uxbridge? I've seen it written a couple different ways. I was going to let you have the definitive word on it.
Okay, I'll give my version. Yeah, you're right. It's basically the Imperial Guard are retreating. The general advance is given. They're going to march down the forward slope. Trumpets blaring, flags flying, and the French aren't using shrapnel. It's been invented by Henry Shrapnel, but it's been kept by the British Army. So it's a piece of probably canister shot or solid round shot that's hit something and shattered, and it takes most of his leg off. This is where it's slightly misunderstood, that it doesn't take all of his leg off. It takes most of his leg off. There's a bit hanging. And apparently he looks down and sees this, and that's the thing. He doesn't see his leg gone. He sees his leg is about to go. So he says, by God, sir, I've lost my leg, thinking it's going to have to be taken off. Wellington looks over, and this could have killed them both. If it's a round shot, it could have gone through them and gone through, 5, 6 guys in the horses. And Wellington looks over and says, by God, sir, so you have. And Paget kind of goes all woozy because loss of blood and shock and adrenaline goes through him. He's stabilised, taken to Mont Saint Jean Farm, which is now the brilliant distillery and restaurant. That's not me. I don't get any commission from their sales, but you can have a good bit of Waterloo beer as well there. And his leg is amputated with a saw. a short saw. It's the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a woodworks school. The saw and the glove of his aide who held his leg is in the National Army Museum. Dark brown, as in the blood has aged over time. So it was a white leather glove originally. And his leg is amputated there. He's kind of being held down. And there's a bit more. Do you want me to go on? There's a bit more about his leg.
Yeah, there's a great quote that he says as he's having the leg amputated. He says, quote, "I have had a pretty long run. I have been a beau these 47 years, and it would not be fair to cut the young men out any longer," end quote. So obviously he knows he's a ladies' man, and this loss of leg. It's great that he can have that kind of gallows humor when you're having your leg sawed off. But yes, can you explain? I can't go see his. It's not his anatomical leg. I can see his wooden leg. Correct, at a museum.
Weirdly, not so weirdly because it's wooden. You can see 3 of them. So I've seen 2 out of the 3. So he has a leg created, cutting edge technology. So you say he's a beau, and I've said he's handsome. One of his passions is dancing. And so to have a dancing, you can't have a Long John Silver's peg leg. It wouldn't work. You'd swivel on the spot and you could tap it, but you can't tap your foot. And this is almost like line dancing, but before the Americans get really excited, it's not quite so cowboy, I'm afraid. It's not quite country and western. It's long lines where you kind of work your way down. I suppose it's more like Scottish country dancing, actually. Okay. Well, when you come to Scotland, my friend.
So he has these legs made, these different legs, like prosthetic legs, yeah.
They're prosthetic legs, sorry, yeah. And they've got like a leather patch at the knee. They have springs in the heel. And then down the core, there's this spring that's reinforced. And I'm pretty sure it's kangaroo's tendon. It's what I was told. It was kangaroo's tendon. At least it's animal tendon. So that the leg has got this kind of natural suppleness that when he picks it up, it will bend in a fairly realistic way. So he can still dance. And one of the stories, this is one of the ones that's kind of not written down immediately, so I don't know how true it is, but you can believe it if the other quotes are true, is that when he comes through after his amputation, is he asks, "Will I dance again?" And so that they make these legs. And there's 3 of legs that I know of that survived. You think that, with prosthetic legs today, they're remade every few years anyway. There's one in his house in Anglesey in Wales. There's one at the Household Cavalry Museum in London, and there's one at the Musée Wellington in Waterloo. So I've seen the Household Cavalry and the Musée Wellington one, and they've got like sections taken out of it, so you can see the internal workings of it. So kangaroo tendons, springs, leather patches, cutting edge technology by 1815 standards.
Yeah, that is. And, he goes on to live a full life. He doesn't die right there on the battlefield.
No, he dies a year after Wellington. He dies 1853. So
tough guy.
Life. And you can visit where his leg is buried in Waterloo, which is in the next to the back of the grounds of Wellington's headquarters. His leg's buried there. Wellington gave a tour to who was the Prince Regent, later George IV of Waterloo, and he looks out over the field of Waterloo. Now, battlefield tourism started the day after Waterloo and was very popular. So Wellington gives a personal tour to the king, and apparently the king just flat-faced, no emotion, just nothing, just not moved by the scene of death and destruction at all. And there's been memorials and cairns set up from, again, day one. And then he shows him the site of Wellington's leg, and he's meant to have broken down in tears and, "Oh, what loss our country has suffered," was the quote.
Uxbridge's leg. Yeah.
But maybe there's, because he knows Uxbridge. But it's Uxbridge's legs continues.
Well, apparently the British government offered him £1,200 in annual compensation for the loss of his leg, which he refused. What was his later career like?
Yeah, so he refuses the money. I mean, that's a lot of money by that standards at the time. And he goes on. He becomes one of the Lord High Stewards of England. He's given specific honours, honorific titles, and he does make it into British government. A bit like Wellington, he goes into politics, and he serves under Wellington is government in politics as the Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, which is one of the high offices because you are governing islands under the unification that we had there. and he stays in politics for quite a long time. And there he goes through all of the difficulties of the Irish question and the Catholic emancipation, and carries on his life effectively. He's probably going to be overshadowed at this point of Wellington, who has this absolutely shining career.
Yeah.
But he actually then gets on relatively well with Wellington. He's in his government. He's comes to dinner at Apsley House many times. And if you visit Apsley House, there's the Waterloo banquet painting. And Uxbridge is there, about 4 seats away from Wellington. And this is at a dinner of about 96 men. So he's actually very close. And the reason that he's fourth there is because you've got the king eating there. So he's in the high seat anyway. So they do become friends. And I think that it's quite nice that they reconcile from the earlier, let's say, misunderstanding. But they've both had their difficult lives. Wellington loses his wife. Uxbridge, marries his second wife, and they stay together till her death.
Yeah.
So it's nice that they serve together in politics in many ways.
It is. And they buried the hatchet. And I know he introduced state-aided education for 400,000 children in Ireland. As we mentioned, he produces 6 surviving children with Lady Charlotte. They stay married. So, he honored her and married her. It wasn't like he was just mistressing around with her. So that's good.
No. That was a lot of children, even by standards, in the 1820s.
Yeah. And then he dies at the old age of 85 years old in April 1854. What do you think his legacy is?
His legacy is probably always going to be that cavalry charge at Waterloo. Scotland Forever as a painting by Lady Butler, the Scots Greys having the cap badge of the Waterloo Eagle. That moment in history, that gamble of throwing in cavalry against a corps of infantry, that's probably always going to be his legacy. To me and to most people, they will know Ney's cavalry charge, and they probably know the name of the Union and Heavy Cavalry Brigade more than Uxbridge. He is overshadowed by Wellington, rightly or wrongly, but that would probably be his legacy to me. Actually, Sahagun is probably a better cavalry action because it is cavalry on cavalry. That's probably his main legacy. And it seems that because he's from Anglo-Irish stock, he doesn't do a bad job in Ireland. Always a good thing because really difficult politics at the time.
Sure.
So it's good that he does some good there, but that's good by British standards in the 1800s. So that comes with a caveat. But yeah, he is a cavalryman, and between Sahagun and his charge at Waterloo, that leaves us with some legacy to talk about.
Yeah, you wonder. I mean, him going to Waterloo ended up costing him his leg, but I think in many ways, it probably helped save his reputation because it wasn't too good until Waterloo. I mean, it was personally, it wasn't very good. A lot of scandal to it. Yeah, if he didn't go to Waterloo, he still would have had his leg. But I think that charge was huge in Wellington's victory, and the romance around him losing his leg and him kind of saving the day, as you mentioned, on June 17th. I think that really helped his legacy going back to Waterloo.
Yeah, I'd agree. And, he's probably got a lot of mileage out the story of how he lost his leg next to Wellington at the moment of victory of Waterloo. It's quite a good story in itself because it doesn't just happen in the middle of the battle. It's kind of after the victory's won. It's pretty much one of the last French cannon shots. You can imagine they kind of fired it and then hitched up their cannon and headed towards Paris. So very unfortunate, very unlucky. Should have, it's one of these things he should have got off without a scratch. But he seems to have, the quote you shared, he seems to have taken it in good humour. And it didn't affect his dancing as well, which is obviously his priority. So each have their own. But it is the cavalry. It's Sahagun, it's Waterloo Heavy Cavalry Charge. And as we've discussed before, Waterloo does seem to overshadow a lot. But I've always got a soft spot for those medium and small scale Peninsular War actions because they're just quite exciting.
And I think a lot of these guys, battlefield, even if you were horribly scarred as he was, it was still a badge of honor. It was glorious. I remember when Marshal Ney walked over to Marshal Bessier, who was just hit by a cannonball and was lying dead on the ground. Instead of being sad, he's like, all right, well, that's a warrior's death. Good for him. Let's move on. In their mind, that's a glorious way to go on the battlefield.
They are warriors. This is the era that a dueling scar, especially in Prussia, is thought of as being very dashing. Cavalry have this kind of reputation of, living quite fast and gregariously. So it goes along with that, definitely.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you, my friend, for that. As always, you can follow Marcus just about anywhere, McCribb History, if you really want to follow him. But yeah, great stuff as always. And we thank you, my friend.
You're so welcome. And you know what? It's good to be back. I've obviously been listening along to the rest of the podcast and in my spare time and enjoying it. So it's great to hear you going from strength to strength.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Thanks to everyone. Bye.